Hey everyone, I'm John Roden, and I saw a bird today. I actually saw two birds that I wanted to share. I saw a pair of Cooper's hawks, which are nesting in my neighborhood. And I was walking my dog this morning, Zipper, who Christine knows.
I have
And,
met him.
and we saw this pair of Cooper's hawks flying overhead, calling, and it was a great way to start the day.
Wow, that's such a cool sighting. Say hi to Zipper for me. And I also saw a bird. So this week I was at the community garden that I go to, and I saw one of my favorites, a northern cardinal. And in the spirit of I saw a bird, we also want to know what you're all seeing in the viewers. So feel free to drop a comment below of what you saw this week.
Well, welcome. We have another great show for you this month. We're going to start off with a conversation about the importance of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Then, for Pride Month, we're cranking up the volume on some avian-inspired music with non-binary queer singer-songwriter Stephan Nance. Afterwards, we'll host a discussion on equitable access to the outdoors through the Environmental Justice for All Act. And finally, we'll dive into all things seabird with Audubon's Seabird Institute. First up, we have two guests joining us from Alaska to talk about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the largest national wildlife refuge in the United States. First, Nauri Toler is an Inupiaq woman born in Utqiagvik, Alaska. She worked for 7 years in the health, safety, environmental, and training field on the North Slope, and is currently the Arctic Slope Environmental Justice Organizer for Native Movement. And we also have Dr. Natalie Dawson, a wildlife biologist and the current executive director at Audubon, Alaska. So welcome to the show, Nauri and Natalie.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, John.
Welcome, Nauri and Natalie. So to kick it off, the Arctic Refuge is located in Alaska's northeast corner, and it's home to a huge variety of species, including polar bears, caribou, and wolves, including millions of birds from around the world that migrate either to or through the Arctic Refuge each year. So let's start off by asking about this truly unique place and why you're both drawn to this work. So Nauri, why don't we start with you, and then we can go to Natalie.
Anakaluatak kanaripisi uvanganariak savaktunga Native Movement. What I said was, hello everyone, how are you doing? My name is Nauri and I work for Native Movement. This particular area is extremely important. It is the birthing ground for 40,000 caribou calves in the porcupine caribou herd every year. And the reason that it's so special is because it provides a lot of the environmental factors that the calves need to survive, including not as many mosquitoes, the right temperatures. And so this area is really important to keep that herd really just thriving. I'm Inupiaq, and there's a Inupiaq village, Kaktovik, that's located right in the 1002 area in Anwar. And the Gwich'en people, our relatives, are also very concerned about any development in this area. They call this area the Ijikwatsan Gwandai Gudlit, which translates to the sacred place where life begins. And subsistence is so important to remote villages because 50% of the diet is subsistence based. So caribou is a huge part of not only the culture, but just survival. When you go to the villages, you have expensive groceries. A jar of peanut butter can be $17, a 12 pack of soda is $16, a roast, beef roast can be $40 to $60. So much of the meat comes from whales, caribou, fish, and just basically living off the land, berries, you know, when it's in season. But yeah, I'll toss it over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Nauri, and thanks for the question, Christine. Yeah, I like to think of the Arctic Refuge as a place where the rivers write the rules. It's a landscape, actually, the last remaining protected portion of the Arctic landscape within the United States that isn't transformed by industrial uses. So it's one of those places where the way you move across the landscape as a person or as an animal is dictated by processes that we don't control. When you're walking in the refuge, you have to cross rivers and you have to go up and down mountains. And oftentimes the easiest paths of travel are those paths that have already been laid before you by other animals. So, being a newcomer to Alaska in terms of those people who have lived for generations on the land. When I did my first trip in the Arctic Refuge as a young biologist over 20 years ago, when I moved to Alaska, I was struck by just the age of the landscape, how old it was. And it really is old. It's been a refuge for animals since the ice ages. And one of the ways in which you can see the age on the landscape is the paths taken by caribou and Dall sheep, for example, are crisscrossed across the landscape. So if you were to fly over the Arctic Refuge, you can literally see the trails left by the caribou migrations because they follow these same paths year after year. And you can see the trails cut by Dall sheep into the scree slopes of the Brooks Range because they follow these same paths year after year. And if we think of birds, the hundreds of thousands of birds that come to the refuge to breed and raise their young, those migrations have also been taking place for many, many thousands of years. So it's one of the few places left in the world where, as a human or as a non-human relative, we are really at the whim of the natural cycles within that place. And it's very humbling. It's humbling both to participate in those natural rhythms when you're visiting, and it's also humbling to be advocating for such an incredible landscape as someone at Audubon.
Thank you both for that. And it occupies for someone who's never been there, such a place in the imagination. It seems so magical. So thank you both. Nauri, the Arctic Refuge clearly is a sacred place for many Indigenous groups. Can you speak to the importance of the Arctic Refuge for the Inupiat people, the Gwich'en that you mentioned, and members of nearby communities like Kaktovik that you mentioned?
Absolutely. When you live in villages in the Arctic slope, they're very remote, and you have, I see pictures going up family camp. This is me when I was younger, and my Aka or grandmother. This is a picture of my grandmother and grandfather, Aka and Appa, and it's very different to be on the land, and it's hard to explain, but I grew up in Nuoxet, which is right next to the Alpine development in the NPRA. So there's already development around this area, and they have gravel pit blasts that affect the residents. They hear it every night at 6 p.m. Sometimes they're so strong that they cause cracks in the wall in the homes. You can see oil rigs and pads from the village, and there are people on both sides. It does bring some economic incentives into the community. So people kind of go back and forth, but a large portion are really concerned about how it affects migration in the caribou, the fish. They're seeing mold in fish. They're seeing black bone marrow in caribou now. Noticing changes in migration and in numbers. People have to go out farther to get their subsistence, and it's not a matter of if they get the same amount, they have to. That's how they eat. That's what they're relying on for food to feed families. So it has to be done, and they just are having to work harder to make it happen. And so Kaktovik is right in that area where they're looking to develop in Anwar right now. And so they're looking at a lot of the same consequences potentially if this development goes through. And how the Gwich'en kind of tie into this is they rely heavily on the porcupine caribou herd. And that is the herd that comes through and births 40,000 calves a year in Anwar. And so it can be really devastating. The studies that they've done and the information that we know doesn't just affect the animals, right? Although that's hugely important because we rely on that, our people rely on that for the food. But the mental portion of it too, they're going to have a lot of newcomers. In a village of 200, Kaktovik has 200 people, and they're going to be inundated with people from all over the world coming to develop. They're going to start seeing flares. They're going to have a lot of the negative consequences that comes with industrialization of an area that we've seen over and over again throughout the world. So what am I saying? So Gwich'in have been really concerned about this, particularly with the porcupine caribou herd for a long time, and Kaktovik mutes, the residents are really starting to assert their concern, especially with these studies that blatantly say it's going to affect the land, it's going to affect the animals, and it's going to affect the lives of the people who live nearby.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's so disheartening to hear that there's development going on like right in your communities, but thank you for sharing your photos as well. That's such a beautiful family and beautiful photos. So Natalie, the Arctic also plays a critical role in the fight against the climate crisis. So could you talk a little bit about the latest findings in Audubon's Natural Climate Solutions Report?
Yeah, of course. So just a few weeks ago, Audubon released the Natural Climate Solutions Report, and one of the major findings was that Alaska is our nation's largest carbon sink. The entire state stores over 50% of the total carbon for the United States, which makes sense. We're a big state. And at the same time, Alaska is warming at almost 3 times the rate of the rest of the country, especially if we look at the Arctic region. Even with that warming, we're expecting Alaska to continue to play a really important role into the future for, total carbon storage and therefore a fight against the climate crisis. So not only are Alaska's public lands and waters, places like the Arctic Refuge, important for birds, wildlife, humans, and traditional ways of life, but that biological and human diversity also supports necessary components of a functioning global system that can combat the climate crisis. If we look just at the Arctic tundra system within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, for example, that tundra system, that coastal plain that we're talking about, stores 2 times the amount of carbon that's held in the surrounding atmosphere. And I'll just end it by saying that, we think of Alaska as being big and intact, but the other finding of our Natural Climate Solutions Report recognizes that over 80% of Alaska, including many of its classified protected lands, are actually vulnerable to industrial development. So it's kind of both things. It's really important for us in the fight against climate change, but Alaska is also incredibly vulnerable, and the work being done in the Arctic Refuge highlights that vulnerability.
Absolutely. Thanks for that recap and overview, Natalie. That's super helpful. Now, as we know, many advocates from Alaska and across North America have been working for many years to protect the area from development. But earlier this year on January 6th, the first ever oil and gas leasing sale was held in what is known as the 1002 area of the coastal plain. Natalie, can you give us an update on where things stand now and what steps need to be taken to restore protections to the refuge?
Sure. Thanks for that question, John. There's been a lot of news lately, and it can look at first glance like the Biden administration's temporary halt on the oil and gas leasing program in the Arctic Refuge is kind of the fix. And the reality is that it's not. The Arctic Refuge coastal plain remains an incredibly vulnerable landscape. Because of language within the 2017 tax law, there is actually obligation by the United States to offer up lands for oil and gas leasing. So one of our primary responsibilities as voting citizens of the United States and as activists on the ground in each of our communities is to continue to let legislators that represent us know how important the Arctic Refuge is, and that ultimately that language needs to be removed by Congress from the 2017 tax law. In the short term, we can also ask the Biden administration to review the oil and gas leasing program for the Arctic Refuge in light of the fact that the administration has made it clear that combating the climate crisis is one of its top priorities. And the place to start that work is the Arctic Refuge.
Right. And as I understand it, during the recent lease sale, no major oil companies participated, and the state's own public corporation, which is called the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority, was the primary bidder. So, Nauri, what do you think it means to have no interest from these big oil companies?
First, I think that is great news for this side of the argument. It indicates that that's just not worth it, the way that it's been portrayed. And it almost feels like an inundation of big businesses and industry that have been trying to push this narrative that it's going to bring in money for Alaska. I think it was the Congressional Budget Office that originally estimated $1.1 billion to come into Alaska. From these lease sales. They were saying, hey, we're going to make some money. This will benefit Alaskans. Instead, 12 million of the 14.4 million that was spent was from Alaska's own public corporation, ADA. And so that's frustrating because it seems like we're having to, we got the buy-in from industry, like, hey, we don't want you here, and maybe it's not worth it financially. I don't think that our voices alone were the cause of that, but hopefully it made a difference in their going after development in that area. But it's almost a betrayal, it feels like, from Alaska, because they ask, the federal government for sovereignty, for the ability to have a voice and to be able to choose in Alaska, because it's us, we're special, or different, we're unique from the rest of the United States. And then they turn around and they don't allow that same voice from the people who live in the areas that are the people that are going to be directly affected. And so I'm really happy about that. And I really wish that ADA would rescind or give back these leases and listen to the residents of Kaktovik. And yeah, I feel like I had something else to say, but I'm drawing a blank, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, but thanks for that. That's incredibly valuable perspective, and that is frustrating, right? That's how it plays out there. So we have heard that both of you will be heading to the Arctic Refuge in just a few days. Can you tell us about the purpose of that upcoming trip and who will be traveling with you? Natalie, let's start with you and then go to Nauri.
Sure. Yeah, we're so thankful to be able to go back up to the Arctic Refuge here in just a few days. And this trip is part of what's called the Imago Initiative. And the Imago Initiative is looking to reimagine our approach to protecting federal lands by transforming partnerships and seeing opportunities to develop holistic land protections through an Indigenous worldview. In some cases, maybe improving upon what could be considered wilderness designations. And our kind of general theme is from different perspectives come better results. And a core of that work within this initiative is understanding that much of the work that needs to be done is simply dialogue between people, between conservation groups, between the Inupiat and the Gwich'in, between many of us who have even worked in this space for a long time. And so we'll be traveling to the refuge to actually have place-based dialogues with elders and youth from Indigenous and Gwich'in communities, as well as conservationists from organizations such as Audubon, and talk about what permanent protections for the Arctic Refuge could look like, because the Arctic Refuge Protection Act, which is currently working its way through Congress again, is one of those ways, but there still needs to be this larger discussion about what permanent protections look like for the coastal plain.
It's very exciting for me because we do have these leaders within this movement that are gathering in in the refuge. We're getting together. We're going to appreciate the land. We're going to have elders there. Sarah James, a Gwich'in elder, is coming from Arctic Village. We have Robert Thompson from Kaktovik, an elder from Kaktovik that's coming, an elder from Utkalvik that's coming, Nutak, and Indigenous environmentalist. I hate to use that word. Maybe I won't use that word, but Indigenous land protectors, all coming together with leaders in the field and being able to brainstorm and build connections and have that moment with each other is very exciting to me. I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully we can show a little bit to you all about the appreciation for the land.
Absolutely. Well, wishing you safe and restorative and beneficial travel, and really look forward to hearing about your journeys there. The Arctic really clearly is an important place, not just for birds and wildlife, but for people everywhere too. So I know our audience is always looking for ways they can support. So we'll be dropping a link where you can take action to ask Congress to permanently protect this vital place. So thank you both so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise, and yeah, safe travels, and really hope that everything, we can work toward a better solutions up in Alaska. And thank you all for your work that you're doing up there.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both, and safe travels. So for our next segment, one of our hopes for the show has always been to bring the joy of birds and nature to people all over the world, which is why I'm really excited to welcome on our next guest, Stephan Nance. So Stephan is a musician who found their love of birds during a period of self-care and healing, and they have since released an album aptly titled Look at the Harlequins, and birds are now an ever-present part of their music. And this is actually extra special for me because I first became a fan of Stephan's music when I found one of their music videos over 10 years ago on YouTube. So we've really come full circle. Welcome to the show, Stephan.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you here, Stephan. On your Bandcamp, you describe yourself as Sparkbird, aka Stephan Nance, who's a queer Portland, Oregon-based singer-songwriter specializing in poetic piano pop. What's the story behind that name?
Well, so as many people here I'm sure know, a sparkbird is the bird that ignites your passion for birds. So the story behind the name is the story behind my sparkbird. And so I was in a dark period of my life, as Christine mentioned, and I started going on these daily bike rides to some wetlands. And one day this bird landed in a tree right in front of me and just totally took my breath away. I didn't know it was possible to see a bird like this in the wild. And I managed to get a picture. And when I got home, I ID'd the bird as a male Western tanager. And I think, so Cornell Lab has a description that is just perfect, which is that looking at a male Western tanager is like looking at a flame. And so this was really a spark bird, like in every sense. And so, yes, and there is a Western tanager right there. And so, yeah, so birding, it just really helped me improve my mental health and connect with my creativity after a long period where I had written nothing. So that sparkbird really changed my life and my music. And it's just, so it makes sense to have chosen that name to go by.
Yeah, that's such a lovely story and great sparkbird choice. So besides your name, birds also take center stage in a lot of your music. So I thought we could hear one of your songs now, and this is one of my personal favorites, actually.
Licks a beater, a northern flicker, clucks a whimper, a beep goes off inside.
I love that reveal. And we'll drop a link to Stephen's YouTube channel as well if you want to watch the rest of their music video. So this song, Overwintered, is one of the songs in your album titled Look at the Harlequins, which you released last May. So I'm curious, what was your inspiration behind the theme and look of this album?
So Look at the Harlequins is partly a reference to Vladimir Nabokov's novel by the same name. And so in that book, when the protagonist is feeling down, his eccentric great aunt says, "Stop moping and look at the Harlequins." And she tells him that everything around him, from trees to situations, are Harlequins, these characters that can help find him joy. And of course, this made me think of Harlequin ducks and how much I wish someone had told me when I was younger to look at the Harlequin ducks to find joy. And actually, there were no Harlequin ducks in that novel, and I was very disappointed. But so the cover of this album and the whole look for it, I wore this Harlequin duck inspired makeup look designed by paleontologist Dr. Lisa Buckley, who is known for her bird glamour makeup designs on Twitter and elsewhere. I know she did something for the Audubon Society, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. We did a YouTube video with her.
Cool. Yeah, so that's the story there.
Great. I think that the advice to look to the Harlequin ducks is, something we should all kind of incorporate into, if they're in your, where you're located, absolutely seek them out. More recently, Stephen, you've incorporated bird calls and even characters like the gray catbird into your music. Can you tell us a story about how you ended up with one of these species in your songs?
Yeah, so I really like to use birds to give my songs a sense of place and emotion, and for me, a sense of realness, because in my life, I am never not birding, as most birders would attest. Like, you're always noticing birds. And so often if I'm writing a song especially about something real in my life, it feels like it's incomplete without the birds, because they're always there. And I like to say that they're the witnesses to human dramas. They're kind of like the Greek chorus to our lives. And I always imagine, like, what birds were present for famous like historical events and things. But so one special Pacific Northwestern bird that I wrote a song around is the varied thrush. They're probably my favorite bird, like close. It's a close tie with Western tanager. And so some populations are altitudinal migrants. So they move down to lower elevations in the winter. And so we mostly see them in Oregon in the darkest, most dreary months. And their song is just really haunting. And sometimes they sing in winter. And so when I hear that song on a foggy, like February morning, at a time when most of us are feeling all angsty and discontented in Oregon, I can't help but just like go quiet and listen. And it's a very profound feeling. But so the song that I wrote around this bird, it connected the varied thrush to those angsty, discontented February feelings. And the main focus of it is the idea of like staying too long in a bad relationship. And there are a bunch of birds in that song. So I was thinking about, what if a bird stays too long somewhere? And so that's basically how I incorporated that.
That's awesome. So I believe you actually have a teaser, and we will share that link. It's a special link for our viewers here, and we'll drop that in the comments so everyone can check that out. So we are still in June, and of course, we're currently celebrating Pride Month, even though it is always Pride, of course. And while the world of birding and the outdoors has evolved over the years, we still have a long way to go in creating a truly inclusive experience for everyone. And that's why we have initiatives like Let's Go Birding Together, pun intended, which was launched by Spring Creek Audubon's Jason St. Sauvey in 2016. And I'm actually wearing one of our new Let's Go Birding Together shirts right now. I don't know if you can see this. And I see you're wearing one too, Stephen,
Yep.
From one of the past collections. So we'll be sure to drop a link for those of you who want to check out our new collection in the comments. And that brings me to the next question, Stephen, which is, how does your queer identity intersect with birding?
So for me, what I think about is that, so we know that women, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and queer people, among other people with other marginalized identities, people with disabilities, have historically been excluded from outdoor activities like birding for a variety of reasons. To name just a couple, there's safety issues and financial barriers, and those intersect with our identities and give us more or less access to those spaces depending on who we are. And so after seeing that Western tanager, I was so excited about birds, but when I would hang around those wetlands looking at birds, I often felt like the real birders, who were usually cis hetero white men, were like looking down on me, or, you know, if I asked a question or something, I'd feel like I was not welcome there. And like you had to already be an expert to get in the door. And so I was kind of like, well, I guess I can really only bird in private, which isn't really the greatest feeling. And I also didn't really have money for binoculars. And because of my situation as like a low income person who had struggled a lot because of being queer. And so, so it took a while before I could really start birding. And it wasn't really until a friend of mine who's a queer bird guide, Rebecca Waterman, she has done a lot of great work for inclusive walks for the Lane County Audubon Society in Oregon. And she told me that I had permission to go look at birds, which seems obvious, but I didn't feel like that was the case until someone said it to me. And so that's something that I want everyone to know, is that you have permission to go out and take up space in the birding world.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen.
All right, I think I'm up. So we're a little bit behind time, but if you could just very quickly tell us what's next for you in the world of art and birds before we move on.
So in the world of birds, I'm working on this very birdie young adult novel set at a wildlife refuge in Eastern Oregon, and I'm workshopping it at this Lambda Literary Writers Retreat in August. I'm really excited about that. And then in the world of music, this new single, Varied Thrush, is going to come out, I think, in August, and then an album in the fall. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so excited to stay updated on all your new projects. So thank you so much again for joining us today, Stephen. We'll be sure to share your links to your Patreon and website in the comments so everyone can stay up to date on your latest releases.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Stephen.
So a healthy environment with clean air and water is, of course, inseparably linked to the larger issue of racial justice and environmental equity. And all of us deserve equitable access to the outdoors, where we can breathe the same clean air and drink the same clean water. But communities of color have long suffered disproportionate environmental and health impacts from polluting industries. And this year, the Environmental Justice for All Act was reintroduced in the House and the Senate. And this bill would strengthen existing laws like the National Environmental Policy Act to meaningfully consider the voices of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and other people of color when federal projects are being planned and built. It also calls for more equitable access to the outdoors and parks. So in addition, this bill would strengthen parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by prohibiting discrimination based on disparate impact, allowing private citizens, residents, and organizations to seek legal remedy when faced with this discrimination. And this would help begin to reverse systemic inequities and harmful environmental impacts that have existed for decades. So to talk about this comprehensive environmental measure, we're really happy to welcome back Tykee James, Government Affairs Coordinator at Audubon, to the show. Welcome, Tykee.
Hey, happy to be back. Nice show you got going here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tykee. Great to have you here. I would say that environmental justice is sort of a relatively new area for Audubon to delve into, Could you share how do you think this came about and how does this legislation connect with birds and conservation?
Absolutely. That is such an important question. I want to say immediately, we cannot achieve environmental progress for birds or people if we ignore present issues in the legacy of environmental injustice. Full stop. I believe our current mission enables us to direct our advocacy efforts on this topic because Audubon is local in so many places. And where we center communities in outcomes, especially those who are most marginalized, we can secure the best benefits for bird conservation. And I think that's something birders like. And if we all believe that all people should enjoy the natural scenic beauty of the world and have equitable access to it, we can act now and support the Environmental Justice for All Act, which, as you mentioned, does some really neat things and connects things to things. And I think more than ever, people should realize how connected a lot of these things are, especially if you're a birder.
Exactly. And to follow up on that, a lot of our viewers are birders, in fact. So could you share your perspective on why this issue and others like this issue are important for birders to care about?
If we want the future of birding to be more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive, more sustainable, all birders should support environmental justice. Birdwatching isn't just about enjoying nature today. It's always been about the stories of people who share that space and time with our feathered friends. And we know birders vote. It's one of my favorite pictures of me doing my job, similar to what I'm doing here, but I don't have a nice little I bird I vote sign. I think if we want to think about the legacy we leave as a birding community, we have to ask ourselves that question. What legacy are we leaving as a birding community? Is this going to be something we think folks will be proud of when we look at what birding was 100, 200 years from now? One thing that I don't want to continue in that birding future is folks who say after migration, birding is over. Birding isn't over after migration. Like, look at this random red-winged blackbird. It was by the Constitution Pool. I really enjoyed that the extra sun that comes from the summer means we can see the brilliance and the contrast of all these colors. We can see breeding behaviors. We can see nesting behaviors that you just don't see year round. So birding doesn't stop after migration. That's one thing I think we can leave in the birding past. But I really do think the birding future, we have a lot of things to be excited about.
Totally agree, Tykee, including that birding does not stop after migration, 100%.
It never has. It never has.
Exactly, it never has. You recently wrote a great blog for Audubon about making access to the outdoors more equitable, and I think that we dropped that in the that link in the chat as well. In it, you said, quote, the lack of diversity and inclusion in outdoor spaces can be traced back to the very beginning of parks in the United States. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I think like Sierra Club did a profile on John Muir, Audubon did a profile on John James Audubon, somebody he should do a biopic on Madison Grant, a card-carrying racist conservationalist. And I say that with the confidence and clarity because he literally wrote the book on how to design parks to exclude Black and brown people. It is incredible how basic this was at 1916. So not even fully 100 years ago. And his influence in park design may not be necessarily represented in all forms today, but it's important to know how that started. And it's important that we recognize that history and want better because we deserve better. We deserve better because we can work for it. We can organize for it. One of those ways that we organized for it was during Black Birders Week. And I think it's really important that, what we have achieved in just as birders is bringing that attention, bringing that connectivity of looking at birds and trees and neighborhoods and communities and understanding that there have been a legacy of decision-making that have put resources in one area and no resources in other areas. And a simple way to look at that is park benches, street lights, and trash cans. There's one side of a park that has it. There's another side that doesn't. One side of the park has affluent community. The other side of the park does not. And that's an example of an injustice that I think all birders can recognize. I don't think this is something that we take our focus off.
Absolutely, and we shared the image on the Blackbirders Week that happened earlier this month for the second year. So thanks for your leadership on that, Tykee. How can our viewers support this legislation and other and legislation related to similar issues?
I think the first thing is keep voting. If birders can have this very strong voice in the ballot box, in the House of Congress, in the State House, if we show, when we show that we are people who care about our avian species, we also vote in accordance to that. And I think it's also important to take action where you can. Right now, we're asking for you to contact your elected member of Congress to get them to co-sponsor this bill. It's important that folks speak up for environmental justice for all. You took the words right out of my mouth. And it's important that we hear it from birders. I think birders can have a very strong influence in achieving environmental justice in cities and towns all across this country, just because we talk about birds. It's literally so special that we are connected to birds in this way, and we can move policy in that. So being humble in that means something, but also taking action, because if we know we deserve better, we know we can do better, we can take action.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much power in collective action, and we all have the power to do that. So we'll drop a link to that alert that you mentioned, Tykee, for our viewers to sign, and we'll support this important bill together. So thank you for joining us today, Tykee.
Happy to be here, and congratulations on the finale.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tykee. All right, next up, we're going to dive into seabirds with two guests from Audubon's Seabird Institute, which was previously known as Project Puffin. We're excited to welcome the Institute's Director of Conservation Science, Dr. Don Lyons, and Eastern Egg Rock Island Supervisor, Garlick-Ott, who are here to talk about protecting and appreciating seabirds around the world. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Kay. Hi, Don.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be here. And unbelievable to be here in the finale episode. What an honor.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you both here. So before we hit it off with the questions, we wanted to play a quick video that actually explains the history of Project Puffin in under 1 minute.
That's Dr. Steve Kress, also known as the Puffin Man. Puffins had nested on islands near Maine until they were extirpated by hunters in the 1800s. Steve Kress was committed to bringing these seabirds back to one island called Eastern Egg Rock, and that's how Project Puffin got started in 1973.
We had to begin thinking like a puffin, and that's when we came up with the idea of putting out some decoys. Almost immediately, there was a third bird. In 1981, we saw it finally. A puffin came zooming in with fish in its beak, and it dropped under the rocks, and it came out shortly thereafter without the fish. That was evidence that after nearly 100 years, there was a puffin chick on Egg Rock again.
Today, Audubon Seabird Institute is using the success story to restore not just puffin colonies in Maine, but seabirds worldwide.
So that was a video that we posted on our TikTok channel, and you can be sure to follow us on our channel, which is Audubon Society on TikTok for more birdie content. So Don, the Seabird Institute has recently been rebranded and updated. So could you tell us about what this new Seabird Institute is all about?
Yeah, so like the video showed, Audubon really got focused on seabirds quite some time ago, almost 50 years ago for Project Puffin. And a lot has happened since then. And that effort, really started in one place, Eastern Egg Rock, but it's expanded to a network of islands where we work to protect and study seabirds, Maine, and then we're really expanding our work and the influence of our work across the country. So a couple of years ago, we rebranded ourselves as the Seabird Institute, and that's really driving our interest in helping seabirds around the country, even around the world. Within Audubon, we've partnered with a lot of really terrific colleagues like Tykee in Washington, D.C. and others to not just study birds and work in the field with them, but also push for policies and new laws that protect the ocean, that protect the food base for seabirds, and protect some of the most important areas they rely on. So we're still headquartered in Maine, kind of our spiritual hub is there, but we've really carried that work nationally. And we try and listen to seabirds wherever they are, listen to what they tell us, and then translate that into action we can take to protect them.
Awesome. Thanks, Don, for that and for all the work that you're and that team are doing there. And I mean, as the comments indicate, everybody loves these birds, right? They're so special. So Kay, the other day when we talked, you were in your tent. So it's good to see you in, I guess, I don't know, in a structure, although I imagine maybe you'd rather be in the tent. Just a couple questions for you. So first of all, what kind of research are you doing out in the field, and which species are conservation priorities right now for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, great question. So it's a bit of a juggling act out here every day. We have 6 species of seabird that we work with, 3 species of tern, obviously the Atlantic puffin, black guillemots, and Leach's storm petrels. All of them amazing. I don't know if I have a favorite. And we're looking at a couple different sort of conservation monitoring factors. So population size, breeding success, and in some cases diet. But how we do that depends on the species. So with puffins, for example, we estimate population size through resighting through scopes, whereas with terns, we actually walk the entire island and count every single nest. So all of that, and they're on different timelines, and it's all in my head. And we that's how we monitor them over the course of a breeding season. And some species, I would say, are probably more priority species than others. So for example, we monitor a breeding colony of roseate terns here. And the interesting thing about roseate terns are that the colonies that come here to breed are endangered. They're federally listed, but worldwide, roseate terns are not endangered or threatened. But when you think about it, they are migratory and their population is somewhat precarious because it's like one of those Jenga puzzles. If you remove one breeding population, the more populations that fail, you're going to have a crumbling of the tower. So I think that's a good example of why protecting migratory species out here is so important. And then obviously the puffins and the original conservation story with Dr. Steve Kress is a big part of what we do out here.
Right, that's so cool to hear about the work that you're doing. And I think we can hear some of those birds you mentioned in the background right now.
Yes, they're ever present.
Audio.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like we have a viewer from Jenny Island tuning in. So that's really cool.
Oh, hey.
Wave across the islands. So, okay, Jody on Zoom wants to know, is that an inside view of the Egg Rock Hilton?
It is. So for those who don't know, the Egg Rock Hilton is a 12 by 12 foot cabin. It's not where we sleep, but we basically do everything else here. So we have our data. I would show you around, but I'm afraid it'd get too shaky. But that's our like cooking and food storage. On the other side is our other food storage, and data's like that way. And my lovely teammates are actually sitting about 5 feet away from me. It's hard to escape each other.
So speaking of the living spaces, could you tell us what daily island life is like? Like, I think it's pretty rugged, right?
Yeah, I made some notes on this because it's hard to put yourself into the headspace of someone back home in their house looking out to where I am in my tent. But that is one of the first things that comes to mind is we do sleep in tents the entire season. We have food delivered to us by boat and we don't have running water. And we have composting toilets, but you kind of more or less get used to it. Although before this, I was thinking to myself, like, I have to pretty myself up. And then part of me was like, how? Because it's a struggle to maintain the same level of sort of cleanliness when you're out here, I would say. It's just part of the job.
Well, you look great, Kay, so.
Thank you.
It's working. Whatever you're doing, it's working. So let's see. Karen wanted to share this comment. I actually attended the Hog Island camp in 2016. It was a life-changing experience. Great work, and thank you to all the interns on the island. I know it's pretty rustic, so just reinforcing that.
We really appreciate that, and we love to see you guys in your boats and wave at you. So if you ever see us, we'll wave at you.
Yes, please do wave at them because they are working very hard and appreciate any sort of greetings like that. Okay, Dawn, you're involved with many exciting conservation projects, including restoring seabird colonies using the social attraction that we talked about, and understanding the relationship between seabirds and forage fish. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as that video we started off with showed, a lot of our work started and still focuses on restoring seabirds to islands where they've been extirpated, where they've been lost. The work in Maine decades ago really developed the techniques that are now used very widely across the country, even across the world. And we're actually working with some partners just to tabulate all of the different projects around the world that have used these techniques to help seabirds. There are so many that it's taking a team of us, partners with, we're partnering with folks from the Pacific, from New Zealand, from all over the world. And it's amazing, but the restoration techniques that got started in Maine are now benefiting about a quarter of all the seabird species in the world. So it's a huge legacy of the work here, and something that we're constantly adding to. New species, whether it's a raft supporting common terns in Maryland on the outer shore that Audubon Mid-Atlantic is working on, or working to restore Chinese crested terns in China, a species that was thought to be extinct for over 60 years. So that work is really still going on in a very powerful way. But kind of a new focus for us is this emphasis on forage fish and protecting the food that seabirds need. And as Kay mentioned, we collect data on what fish are fed chicks, for example. So what fish are really critical for seabirds to raise their young and sustain their population. And that really helps us understand how, for one, climate change is going to impact seabirds in the future. Climate change really is changing our oceans rapidly, and both kind of where and how many fish are out there is changing really dramatically. And so seabirds are telling us what's happening in the ocean in a way that's really hard to get data in any other manner. And by knowing kind of what forage fish are doing, we can also help people who manage fishing do a better job. They're often really data starved and don't have great information to make decisions about harvest levels, for example. Seabirds can provide some of that data, and also just mark an important reference point for protecting fish for our own use. If there are not enough fish out there for seabirds, there's not going to be enough fish out there for what we want to eat and use in various ways.
Yeah, and Dawn on Zoom actually wants to know a little bit more about that. Dennis is asking about the Forage Fish Conservation Act. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so kind of amazingly, but most of the fisheries laws in the United States focus on big fish that we harvest. I mean, that kind of makes sense. That's where we've started with regulating fishing. A lot of the small fish that seabirds rely on really don't have a lot of legal infrastructure, if you will. There's not a lot of legal protection for those fish. There's not a lot of consideration of how important they are in the ecosystem to seabirds and other predators. And the Forage Fish Conservation Act is one act that's moving through Congress that would recognize just how important those species are and give them some protection and help them be better managed in the future. So it's a really critical act to protect seabirds, something maybe we don't think of as Audubon members or staff all that often, but that food supply is just so critical.
Thanks, Don. So, Kay, I believe this is your 4th year being involved with the Seabird Institute. So I'm wondering what keeps you coming back year after year, and what has been your favorite field experience so far?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of reasons why I come back. Although to be honest, at the end of every season, I'm a little fatigued, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do that again. But then by mid-year, I'm like, I have to get back out to my island. And so, yeah, a big part of it is being in nature. Also learning new things. I feel like every season I learn something new about the birds, about my own work ethic, about being a supervisor, which I am now. It's also financially supported, which is a huge bonus. And it often doesn't feel like actual work. So I think that's a good sign. And yeah, my favorite moment is more of an extended experience that I had my first year, probably. I had my first common tern feeding study. And it's funny because one of the other panelists, Stephen, said that birds are the witnesses of human dramas. Although I find that out here on the island, when we're doing our monitoring work, we're often the witnesses of bird dramas. So this feeding study was really awesome. I just saw all of these little intricate behaviors between the chicks, especially between siblings. There was this one nest that I was following that had 3 chicks. And usually the third one is the one that gets the fewest feeds and often looks the saddest. And I was rooting for all 3 of them, and it's rare for all 3 of them to fledge, but they all did, and it was really truly remarkable to see that happen, especially since I'd seen them. They're were like this big to when they were like this big, so that was pretty remarkable.
It's great and heartwarming that all 3 fledged. That's I love that. That's
so heartwarming.
Yeah, that's great. And I imagine that there's, even with the rusticness and, there's probably a lot of people watching that would trade places with you, right? To be out there to see that kind of stuff. So thanks for what
I feel very grateful.
Yeah. So we, of course, are running short on time. I have one more question. I wanted to ask, what are some of the ways viewers can get involved with the Seabird Institute? And Don, can I give that question to you quickly?
Yeah. The short answer is go to projectpuffin.audubon.org and look around. There are opportunities such as Kay's role, where you just immerse yourself, you go all in for seabirds and spend the summer working with us on a seabird nesting island. There are shorter term volunteer stints, a couple of weeks to help out when things are really busiest on the colonies. And then it was earlier mentioned that our Hog Island Audubon camp is a great way to get educated and to learn more about seabirds, about birds, about important plants for birds, which John, you help us out with and will be in August. And so there's a bunch of ways to connect to our work and to seabirds. And that website, projectpuffin.audubon.org, is a great place to start.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yes, and I'm so excited that I'll be on Hog Island in August for the Creating Bird-Friendly Habitats course. So thank you both so much for sharing the stories and for all the work that you're doing. And for our viewers who can't get enough seabird content, you can tune into the daily lives of seabirds, including an Atlantic puffling that just hatched yesterday, I'm learning, by checking out our live cams with explore.org. So we'll drop a link to that in the comments as well. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don and
Same
Kay.
here.
So this is a bittersweet moment because we mentioned before that this is our final episode of I Saw a Bird. And we wanted to take a moment to recognize and thank all of you viewers who have tuned into our show. Whether you've been here since the very first episode in April of 2020 or joined us somewhere along the way, I Saw a Bird would not be what it is without each and every one of you. So this month, we've asked you to submit your favorite photos of yourselves birding because spreading joy, the joy of birds is what we're all here for, of course. And I'm really excited to share this video that we've put together. And it features music from Stephan Nance that we heard from before.
I ain't worried about shorebirds, I ain't smelling wastewater. I'm sitting pretty impatient, but I know you gotta put in them hours, I'ma make it hotter. I'm sending pic after picture of the juncos in the hopper. I know you're always at the wetlands, but I can't stand these days alone. And I don't need no explanation, 'cause baby, you're the field guide at home. You don't gotta go bird, 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 but you gotta see a bird, 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 bird. You don't gotta go bird, 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 bird. Let the feeder bring the bird, 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 bird. We can bird from home. Oh, oh. We can bird from home. Oh, oh. Let's put it into motion. Give a patch a promotion. I'll make it feel like a big year. Turn the porch into an ocean. We don't need pelagics, just Nat Geographic. Nothing but knocks in between us and it feels like magic. I know you're always at the wetlands, but I can't stand these days alone. And I don't need no explanation, 'cause baby, you're the field guide at home.
I didn't expect that last one. That was amazing. I could watch that all day and listen to Stephan's music. That was such an awesome video. We couldn't do what we do here in front of y'all without the people behind the scenes who come together to make the magic of I Saw a Bird happen every month.
So we're pulling up the entire crew behind the scenes right now, and it's a pretty long list, but we want to make sure that we get to everyone. So a huge thank you to Preeti Desai, Elizabeth Sorrell, David Ringer, Liz Munoz-Huber, Estefania Palacio, Mike Fernandez, Dan Burns, Nicole Bush, Nick Mason, and Bob Quinn. It truly takes a village and a flock here at I Saw a Bird.
Absolutely, it sure does. And thanks to that team. It's been really amazing. You know, Christine, I haven't been here since the beginning, but I have really enjoyed co-hosting with you over the past few months. And one of my favorite parts of the show is the do one thing that we ask our viewers to participate in at the end of every show.
I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because that's one of my favorite parts too. And I think it's really great that we're able to connect people to these actions that can make a real and direct difference to birds.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so wonderful to share that several of the actions we asked you to take over the past year have resulted in wins. Today, we talked about the Arctic Refuge, where lease sales have been suspended. And that's in part thanks to all of you taking action on that issue back in August of last year.
Yeah, and earlier this year in January, we asked you to stand with us in calling on our elected officials to continue to work towards climate solutions. And just last week, the Growing Climate Solutions Act passed in the Senate 92-8. So again, that's thanks to people like you all who care enough to take action to protect birds in the places that we all need.
Yeah, and our show may be ending today, but we all have to continue to do our part and continue to care. And we've made it easy for you to continue to do one thing. In fact, to do all the things after our show ends. You can go to the landing page for I Saw a Bird, which we'll drop in the comments. And we've made it easy for you to subscribe to our email list, follow along on our social media channels where we keep everyone up to date on the latest conservation news, updates, and actions that you can take. And of course, if you miss us, you can rewatch all the previous episodes there as well.
Yes, be sure to check out that landing page. And a final thank you to everyone for tuning in and for sharing the love of birds. We'll see you all on the internet and beyond. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, everybody.